Hello and welcome to Not Now in Theaters. My name is Will Turntail. This is the first episode of a new segment on this podcast called Side Reels. It's a chance to have a looser conversation about some of the topics I'd like to cover, besides the normal, more in-depth retro reviews of one film at a time. This one is all about Brandon Lee's career before The Crow, including the movie roles and TV appearances he made before his untimely death. Okay, let's get into it. The first time I saw The Crow, it was 1994, and I rented it with my dad on home video. We ordered this new kind of pizza called stuffed crust, which I guess is still around but was a great new gimmick at the time. I was only 10 or 11 then, probably too young to be watching that violent and dark of a film, but I was an 80s, 90s kid, and that's how we did things then. I loved the movie. It was gothic like Edward Scissorhands, but full of action. This invincible hero, back from the dead, got revenge on everyone awful and responsible for he and his wife to be's death. And for the finale, the villains even found a way to make the invincible hero vulnerable, harming hero Eric Draven's Crow companion, which I thought was perfect for adding tension to the finale. See, even at age approximately 10, I was already doing this film analysis and review thing. But I distinctly remember watching one of the film's action scenes, a gunfight, and thinking to myself, oh, is it somewhere in here that the actor died? It was Brandon Lee who was killed while making The Crow. One of the prop guns on set wasn't properly checked and cleared before firing a blank round, and a piece of projectile caught in the chamber flew with the full force of a bullet, striking him in the abdomen. And like some kind of family curse, Brandon Lee was dead, just as his career was hitting new heights. Same as his father, who died just before Enter the Dragon brought the well-known martial artist and actor to worldwide stardom. Young Brandon's performance in The Crow was well received, and it was sure to be the handsome actor and martial artist's breakout to bigger things. But I've always wondered, what were Brandon Lee's movies like before The Crow? Were they any good? If you've wondered that too, well, welcome to this episode that's all about that. So let's go through the movies before Brandon Lee's star-making turn in The Crow. Oh, and a warning before we do, I'm going to openly spoil these movies quite a bit, so if you don't want that to happen, this is your warning. Brandon Lee's first film role came in Legacy of Rage from 1986. It's a Hong Kong action movie, and the only movie Lee made in Hong Kong. The movie was directed by Ronnie Yu. He's had quite an interesting career, directing a lot of Chinese language movies, yet also coming to America and directing horror films. He's directed that extremely odd-looking movie Warriors of Virtue, Bride of Chucky, and Freddy vs. Jason. But Yu also made movies like Fearless with Jet Li. So yeah, I don't know how that career evolution came about. But we're not here for Ronnie Yu. So is Legacy of Rage a good movie? Well, no, but also yes, in parts. The movie seems like the ultimate Bruceploitation movie of all time because here you'd have his actual son in the film. Some of what look like movie posters even have Bruce Lee, like a shadow superimposed, standing there behind Brandon just to make sure you get the connection. And the plot seems like it was written for someone who is just a wrecking ball of martial arts power. That description might make it sound better than it is. The movie is about this guy also named Brandon, which is awfully convenient. Brandon has a girlfriend he wants to marry, named May, and a motorcycle he seems equally hot for. For whatever reason, Brandon's best friend is this guy Michael, also played by a guy named Michael Wong. That's the brother of Anthony Wong, by the way, the villain in Hard Boiled. But anyhow, Michael just happens to be a total drug dealer who comes from a total drug overlord family. But Michael also really likes May, so he decides he'll get Brandon out of the way so he can take May. Michael sets up his supposed friend Brandon in this horrible way. He meets Brandon for dinner in a restaurant where he also meets with this corrupt cop named Sharky. Honestly, if you're working with a cop named Sharky, doesn't that seem like the type of name for a guy you really wouldn't trust? Seems an obvious moniker of badness. But anyway, Michael kills Sharky right there in the restaurant and he frames Brandon for it. So Brandon goes to jail. He spends tons of time there, and then in the end, he comes out to get his revenge on Michael. Most of the movie is based around Brandon's time in prison, so it's not all that exciting. But they do drum up ways to make it cool at times. There's a fight between Brandon and the legendary Bolo Young, As in Bolo, the guy with the amazing Technicolor pecs that squares off against Bruce Lee in Enter the Dragon and fights Van Damme in Bloodsport. And there are some more brawls in the prison, of course. But this movie almost finds redemption with its ending. Brandon's friend from prison, Hoy, teams up with him to go get revenge on Michael. From nowhere, the movie turns into something out of John Woo's heroic bloodshed. Brandon and Hoy go completely commando, crazy. Hoy has 2 Uzis, and they start gunning people down and getting into a car chase. Then they storm Michael's stronghold, full of rolling around to dodge bullets and kicking people in the face. It's very Hong Kong of the era, and I have to applaud it. There's even someone who flies down a banister, but this is after being shot, not as they're firing like in Hard Boiled. For a first film, Brandon Lee is pretty explosive and great here, but the overall movie isn't the best, though it definitely finds some entertainment value at the end. Next up for Brandon Lee, well, that would be starring in the 1989 straight-to-video production Laser Mission, also known as Soldier of Fortune. Yeah, it sounds like a messy production in that the movie was a co-production between West Germany, South Africa, and the US. And they filmed it mostly in Namibia and South Africa. But the first thing you need to know about Laser Mission is that there are no actual lasers in the movie. There might be some implied lasers here, though. The second thing you should know is that Riff Trax made a spoof of the movie in October of 2011, which goes a ways to telling you that, yeah, this movie isn't that great. But I have to tell you, I have a soft spot for Laser Mission and enjoyed it. It's not bad in a so bad it's good way. It's actually just bad. Yet there is a certain charm to the way it handles its business that I enjoyed. Laser Mission is a Cold War spy thing. Brandon Lee plays Michael Gold, a mercenary. There are 2 MacGuffins in the movie, a diamond and Ernest Borgnine's character, Professor Braun. That might be why they put Ernest Borgnine into the actual diamond on the film's movie poster? I don't know. And that's hilarious while we're talking about it. Old man Ernest Borgnine looks like he is pleased, sitting there inside the diamond, almost like that glass, flat prison that the bad people dressed in black broke out of in Superman 2, except he likes the confinement. The movie poster rocks, by the way, and makes the film look a lot better than it actually is. There is a link to it here in the transcript or at the bottom if you want to see it. You've got Brandon Lee doing a double drop kick on a guy, which actually does happen in the movie. Explosions, Lee looking Bond-like with a pistol, and the Alyssa character in a blue dress hiking it up to show off her pistol in its holster. Anyhow, it's all about how Brandon Lee has to go convince Professor Ernest Borgnine to defect to the USA. But instead, the KGB grab him, and they want to use the professor and the diamond to make a nuclear bomb, because it's the Cold War, so of course. Brandon Lee needs to track down the professor. He ends up teaming up with Alyssa, the professor's daughter, who's being very coy about details and leaves you suspicious. Brandon Lee and Alyssa square off against lots of troops, including the big bad known as, wait for this one, Colonel Kalishnikov. Yeah, as in the same Kalishnikov of an AK-47. But see, that doesn't sound like the worst plot ever, does it? It's actually kind of cool, or at least serviceable. Very comic book-like. And the thing about this movie is that it has this awkward and bad charm to it. The sets are shitty, the action is overall lame, but Brandon Lee really does bring some swagger to the lead role of Michael Gold. He keeps delivering these really snarky lines to put a button on the end of scenes, but they just aren't good lines. One of them is, you guys really know how to win friends and influence people. Did you read Dale Carnegie's famous book with that title recently? It's just a weird comeback, and the film is full of these. Another not so excellent line they give him, that's Mr. Asshole to you. What can you really do with that? Maybe Lee improvised these himself, but I'm gonna hope not. The film has a chase scene where Alyssa is driving an old VW van, and Brandon Lee is just firing at people with an AK-47. Cars are going flipping and crashing, but it's still not good either. It's mostly just that crap thing of editing to show Brandon Lee firing the weapon, flip to the cars exploding or getting hit. Brandon Lee can do his fighting moves well, of course, but there are a few parts where the continuity of the movie just broke, and I don't know how he ended up winning. There's a part where Brandon Lee and a foe go tumbling off the side of a building, and for whatever reason Brandon lives, surviving a fall straight onto his back. But the opponent is dead, which you know because some mysterious blood is on Brandon's face. Maybe this was some kind of violent death that they censored out of the movie. Not sure. But it's a broken scene because he's suddenly up fighting someone else. And particularly, there's lots of you want me type of teasing between the two leads that eventually settles up into romance. Lastly, a really funny piece of it is Ernest Borgnine running around with a shotgun at the end of the movie. It's like he's Elmer Fudd from Looney Tunes hunting for rabbits. Running around with a cheap, weird German accent. But I haven't told you about the actual glue that holds this movie together for me, and that's the theme song. That theme is called Mercenary Man, and honestly, I can't get it out of my head. Mercenary Man brings you into the movie, playing over the top of the whooshing title credits, and because it plays 6 times during the film, at least according to Wikipedia, it pretty much leads you through it. And I fucking love this song. It's not good either, but there's a real quality to it that just smooths over all the cracks in the film for me, I'm telling you. It's a real 1980s smooth, sleazy spy sound, and the song just howls in a gruff voice. He's a mercenary man. Mercenary man. Mercenary man. Dun 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 dun. I wish I could play it for you here, but copyrights prohibit me from doing so I just subjected you to my horrible singing. Still, you can use the link below to check it out on YouTube, where it is posted. David Knopfler made the soundtrack, presumably including Mercenary Man. And if you don't know who that is, that's a guitarist from the Dire Straits, with his brother Mark being more famous since David is the rhythm guy. But yeah, also according to IMDb trivia, David is said to have been embarrassed by this movie. But I think his score is pretty cool, so he did what he could. But man, so David's brother is of course the legendary Mark Knopfler, the lead guitarist of the Dire Straits, and he made the soundtrack to The Princess Bride. So when your brother makes the soundtrack to an all-time classic movie in 1987, and you end up doing bargain bin straight-to-video Laser Mission in 1989, yeah, that has to be hard to take. Fun piece of trivia for this film, David Hasselhoff was originally considered for the role of Michael Gold. How amazing! But that's also revealing, right? I mean, you don't want to be following in the footsteps of Hasselhoff. Altogether, I still like the setup of Laser Mission. With the real budget and competence around, this could have been a pretty cool spy adventure. The movie spans a lot of territory, what with Brandon Lee breaking out of a prison to start the film, sneaking around doing spy stuff, getting in a car chase, having to cross the desert, and a final brouhaha with Colonel Kalishnikov at his compound to rescue Alyssa for the finale. The film even tosses in those bonus ninjas. But yeah, Laser Mission isn't a good movie, but if you go into it just wanting to have a good time with a bad movie, it's there for you. And I think trying to carry this shitty movie on his back probably helped Brandon Lee level up a gear or two. Whether you watch the movie or not, I'm telling you, at least just humor me and listen to the theme song, Mercenary Man, and see if it doesn't somehow get stuck in your head. Somehow. The next movie in Brandon Lee's film career was Showdown in Little Tokyo, a buddy cop action movie from 1991. I'm not going to go into this one too deeply because I already made a full episode about this somewhat cult film if you want to check it out. It was mostly a straight-to-video thing, but has fans now. Brandon Lee plays Dolph Lundgren's partner in a very weird role reversal. Dolph Lundgren is a white cop who grew up in Japan and thinks he's Japanese. Brandon Lee's character is partially Japanese, but acts all American instead. They team up together to solve a murder, which ends up being them going after some Yakuza gangsters of Los Angeles. The movie was directed by Mark L. Lester, the director of the Schwarzenegger movie Commando. Showdown in Little Tokyo isn't ridiculous quite like Commando, but has its own silly charms to it. It flings tons of Japanese stereotypes all over the place, and overall you can't say it's a good movie. But it's a silly, fun watch that reminds people of what they liked about 1980s and maybe early 1990s action movies. And Cary Hiroyuki Tagawa is the villain, the same guy that played Shang Tsung in the Mortal Kombat 1995. That guy is great in this movie. He's over the top, but diving full into his performance and worth the price of a rental. So yeah, I don't know how much Showdown in Little Tokyo did for Brandon Lee's career. He's very good in the role, executing some martial arts and delivering some more snarky lines. Speaking of, Lee actually delivers the weirdest line I have heard in my entire history of watching movies. And I'll just tease it for you that if you want to know more about it, go listen to the full episode on this movie. I can't unpack it here because it's too much. It's nonsensical, homoerotic, and maybe racist at the same time. I don't know. Brandon Lee's final film role before The Crow was starring in the 1992 American action film Rapid Fire. It's a movie I had never heard of before, but seems to have done about break-even business. I don't know what its budget was, but it looks like an estimate of $10 million is circulating online. And the movie pulled in $14.4 million at the box office, actually opening at number 3. It also did well in rental stores, making the top 10 of the Billboard charts. And a lot of that was before Brandon Lee's death. After he died on set on The Crow, rentals of all of his previous movies went up, which is quite bittersweet, right? The film was Fox's attempt to have an in-house star in Brandon Lee. They even used the tagline of Brandon Lee, the action hero of the 90s, on it. Lee thought that went a little too far for the record, and I appreciate that. For having such a famous father, he comes across, at least from what I can tell, as humble and wanting to earn his own way. Rapid Fire sounds like a tough shoot because Lee broke one of his toes during filming, having his foot swell up and making him less mobile. But the results, at least as far as the action, are there. In Rapid Fire, Brandon Lee stars as Jake Lowe. He's an art student and he ends up going to this party. Well, it just so happens that while he's at this party, he sees this mob boss named Serrano full-on shoot someone with a shotgun. That's a little bizarre because there are tons of people around this party. So even though Lee sees him get shot and now is a witness, many people would have heard the shooting, you know? It's not that subtle. But that's not what's important here. This pulls Brandon Lee's character Jake into a firefight that breaks out between the Italian mobsters and this drug producer named Kinman Tao's men. Brandon Lee manages to fight his way out, and then he ends up on the run. He goes into witness protection, but the Italian gangster Serrano has it out for him and has moles everywhere. So even in witness protection, people try to kill Brandon Lee, and he eventually ends up in the safe hands of Lieutenant Mace Ryan of the Chicago Police, who is played by the one and only Powers Booth. So Brandon Lee ends up taking on Serrano and Tao, an art student who somehow seems to become an honorary policeman. I mean, he was a witness in protection, but he's, by the end of the movie, like one of their operatives. Yeah, it doesn't really make sense in that way, but they need his help, and you just go with it. There's also no explanation really about why he's so good at martial arts and firing guns. They briefly mention his dad being an operative, and that's what you get. Anyhow, how good is Rapid Fire? Well, let's put it this way. Lee is quite good in it, but the movie itself is quite average. And I think that mediocrity is why it's more of a forgotten film. I'm sure it has fans, but don't get me wrong, but it's by no means a cult movie in movie fan circles, at least that I know of. Some of the stunts are cool to watch, like in the early part of the film. There is an impressive stunt where Brandon Lee's character crashes his motorcycle into a thug and then rides him through a bunch of glass. Very similar, if not identical, to the way they do that in Jackie Chan's Police Story, which came first. And all of the kicking and punching that Lee does, as well as this cool fight with Ao Leong near the end, is impressive. And if you don't know Ao Leong, he's that Asian guy who pretty much plays an Asian bad guy in all the reputable action films, it seems, from the 1980s to the 1990s. I mean, he's in Die Hard, Big Trouble in Little China, seemingly all of them. But the script is just serviceable and there. It crams in some father figure stuff with Brandon Lee's dad having died for a cause and the Powers Booth character mimicking his father. And that whole angle is odd, considering we're talking about Bruce Lee's son, who always had the legacy of his dad's early tragic death. It almost seems like they're exploiting that, which is odd. And the movie gives Brandon Lee a love interest because it needed one more than it naturally had one, if that makes sense. And contrived romance like that somewhat weakens the movie for me. But it's not all bad. There's at least one good line I liked, like when Serrano quips to Tao, "I'm an American, and we know how to take things." That is a very good line because nothing could be truer of our country's past, present, and hopefully not future. The movie does go up a notch when Powers Booth shows up. I just love that actor. And if you don't know him, he's in Tombstone playing Curly Bill or Sin City playing Senator Rourke. A small thing I liked about this movie, when it's time to swear, it's just time to swear. In firefights, people just yell obscenities. Powers Booth is there, busting out a shotgun and yelling, "Son of a bitch!" with that perfect Texas accent. It's awesome. But that somehow feels more real than trying to be too clever for once, if that makes sense. It's nice to not have the one-liners of early 1990s action, 1980s action here. And I did appreciate the moment when Powers Booth tells Brandon Lee, "Why don't you take those fists of fury outside?" That is, of course, a reference to his dad's film. And with a name like Rapid Fire, it would be stupid if it had shit pacing, but this movie flies by ultra fast. But the movie struggles in some areas. It's just so boilerplate, for one. Competent, but boilerplate. And they didn't know what to do with the tone. During a lot of the firefights and things, the movie feels quite hard-hitting and serious. There are police officers getting shot, and it's almost dark and tragic here. It does not have the tones and vibe of a feel-good action flick that we'd normally associate with the 80s and 90s. But it's also not the most serious movie ever because you have an art student running around schooling everyone in the way of properly dispensing of criminals, lamenting about the quality of Pop-Tarts in one scene. The movie also pulls two antagonists. Serrano is as much a bad guy in it as Tao, and big spoiler alert here, okay? Tao sends Ao Leong to kill Serrano, which he does. So all that's left is for Brandon Lee to fight Tao at the end, and these two guys had never even met before. So this didn't make sense. Italian mobster Serrano made Brandon Lee's life hell, but Lee doesn't end up taking him out. And Powers Booth had been trying to bust drug dealer Tao for 10 years, but he doesn't take him out either. Lee fights Tao in an admittedly cool fight on subway tracks. It would have been best to write up an ending where one hero gets the villain they have a beef with. I know that seems all cookie cutter screenwriting 101 stuff, but when you have characters fighting with stakes against each other, that's just a default to be better. So yeah, would I tell you to watch Rapid Fire? You could, especially if you like Brandon Lee. And what's crazy is that at one time John Woo was in talks to direct, but it didn't happen. I can only imagine that pairing of Brandon Lee and John Woo. I think John Woo was busy making Hard Target with Van Damme at the time. So those are all the films. I didn't watch any of Brandon Lee's TV appearances, but we can quickly talk about what they were. The first thing you'll find in Lee's filmography is his appearance in Kung Fu, the movie, in 1986. This is a weird one. If you don't know, Brandon's father, Bruce, was the one who helped create the show, but the studio screwed him out of starring in it, putting David Carradine in it instead. At least that's how I remember the story going. So for Brandon Lee to star in a made-for-TV movie on the show his father never got is something I can't tell as a victory or delayed win. Anyhow, I haven't seen this, but Brandon Lee played the illegitimate son of David Carradine's character. That also makes it more awkward to me with the meta implications of the casting. Lee would come back to this in 1987 with a pilot for Kung Fu: The Next Generation. They made a pilot, but it didn't get picked up, so it aired on CBS Summer Playhouse, a show that aired pilots nobody bought. What's funny about this show is that it was written and produced, at least the pilot, by the writing team of Paul DeMeo and Danny Bilson. Those are the guys who wrote things like The Rocketeer and Trancers, among other things. So their work has been on this podcast before. Then in 1987, Brandon Lee was on just one episode of this police procedural show called O'Hara. And you know what's funny here? The main detective was played by Pat Morita, also known as Mr. Miyagi from The Karate Kid. Lee played a young Yakuza, which seems interesting as in everything else he's a sidekick or the hero. So, at least I think so. So I guess there is a universe here where a descendant of Bruce Lee takes on Mr. Miyagi. So there you have it. Those are the film and TV roles of Brandon Lee before his iconic and tragic final role in The Crow. I really love The Crow, especially Lee's performance. He was for sure an actor just ready to bust into stardom, no doubt. And just like his father, we lost him, and it's sad. Though his career was skewing toward action leads, Lee was interested in all kinds of acting and not content to ride on his dad's success at all. One of the actors in Rapid Fire, Raymond J. Barry, talked with Lee about having Lee star in one of his plays to show more people that he was a credible actor, not just a martial artist and action movie guy. It was his aspiration to have a wide and varied career, not to be pigeonholed into action. And like many, I think we lost a brilliant upcoming talent and, of course, what sounds like a creative and thoughtful human being. This isn't a biography of Brandon Lee, but I want to close this with something from his life here. Lee has a passage from the book The Sheltering Sky inscribed on his tombstone. It was going to be on his wedding invitations. Ouch. Yeah, that's just another thing that his life missed out on. Anyhow, here is the passage on his tombstone. Because we don't know when we will die, we get to think of life as an inexhaustible well. And yet everything happens only a certain number of times, and a very small number really. How many more times will you remember a certain afternoon of your childhood, an afternoon that is so deeply a part of your being that you can't even conceive of your life without it? Perhaps 4 or 5 times more? Perhaps not even that. How many more times will you watch the full moon rise? Perhaps 20. And yet it all seems limitless. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, the first episode of Side Reels on this podcast. Was Brandon Lee definitely set for stardom? Let me know what you think about Brandon Lee's career in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed to this podcast, please do so wherever you're listening from. This podcast episode is a production copyright of Overraked Media LLC, located in Sacramento, California. Reference photos linked in the transcript are copyrighted by the Internet Movie Database. This review's factual information was gathered through online sources like Wikipedia, IMDb, or interviews. Misrepresentations and errors are possible, but unintentional. The introduction music was Kick Shock by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. The exit music and the additional music were also by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com, also licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. The names of those tracks are Realizer, Basic Implosion, and What is Love. See you next time.